Well, a very good afternoon to all of you. This is the final session, so it's amazing to see how many of you are still here. In fact, it was even more amazing to come at 9 a.m. and see the vast number of students and people here, which is something remarkable in Singapore on a Saturday morning, I have to say. Okay. I want to add my words of appreciation and congratulations to Tara. You know, I have to say this. We were with you from the very beginning, and I think we can now say that this conference has been a smashing success, without any doubt. And Prof. Dale Purvis, you did say that the faculty advisory committee did very little, which is true, indeed, and all of the heavy lifting was done by the student committee. But I think I have to say that Professor Dale Purvis, Dale, your agreement with the chairman of the advisory committee was a major factor in the success, and I think many, many things that have happened in this conference would not have been possible without your input. So let's give a hand to Dale for this. Okay. Thank you. Now, the final session, of course, is a panel discussion with our distinguished speakers. What I will do is I will introduce the moderator, Prof. Lonce Wyse, who really needs no introduction. He was just up here. Lonce has been a faculty member in NUS for many years now, but he first came to Singapore in '94. He did his BS in Maths and Computer Science and his PhD in Cognitive and Neural Systems at Boston University. I think he did what I think was a groundbreaking study in computer modeling in pitch perception, which I think is an important study. And it's hard to sort of pin down what Lonce is interested in, because he's sort of interested in everything, you know. He's a consummate musician. He is able to see sound and music from the science point of view. He's a technologist and engineer as well. And there's no doubt that he is a cognitive scientist and a psychologist as well. He is intensely interested in interactive musical systems and sound modeling. Indeed, so interested was he in this that he did join I2R in '94, I believe. Then he took a couple of years off to be in the commercial sector with a company called Flex Effects. Then, thankfully for us in NUS, came back to I2R and subsequently joined NUS Communications and New Media, where he's an associate professor. And he's also the director of the IDMI, that's the Interactive Digital Media Institute, which NUS houses. He's director of the Arts and Creativity Laboratory. He is interested in almost anything connected with sound and music and sound modeling. And he has a vast knowledge which always amazes me when I talk to him. There's always something new about what he knows that I discover. And he is indeed the ideal moderator for this session, because he will be able to tie together all of the many questions which all of you in the audience, particularly the students, have. So I have great pleasure in handing over the session to Professor Lonce Wyse. Lonce, it's all yours.
Bernard, thank you for that introduction, and thank you also for the years that you've provided mentoring and guidance as I've negotiated and figured out how Singapore and the National University work. Your groundbreaking work in music, electronic music, traditional music, and your push for the arts within not always a friendly environment at National University has really been an inspiration to me, and I feel like I've done nothing but carried on some of your initial work in that area. And I also have to say that one of your great talents is also flattery. So thank you very much. I will kick off this last session. Before I do, I want to mention, since I was involved with the poster sessions, I want to say thank you to all the students who contributed posters. I know it's a lot of work to put something like that together, and being part of the judging, I want to recognize that there were many good posters, and that the criteria for a student-led conference for students was a little different than it would have been for a scientific conference, and so it was very difficult to pull out the few posters that, for mention for the awards. There were some outstanding pieces of work that were shown. So thank you very much to all of you who contributed posters. The next session is a Q&A. I know that there were a lot of questions that didn't have a chance to get asked, so you'll have an opportunity to do that now. The focus, I think, will start off with a discussion about career. For those of you who are thinking, wow, this is really interesting, but how do I get there? How can I make my contribution in this field? And what's the connection between what I'm doing now and what I'm seeing people talk about up here on the podium? So I hope we can make some of that clear with some of the guests that we have. I'm going to forego introductions because we have actually a fairly short amount of time to do this. And most of you have met these speakers either upstairs in the sessions or watched them speak. But I will ask the first question. And so with that, let me invite the panelists. And I hope you know who you are because to come up on stage here.
We know who we are. We have no idea.
And so the panelists that we have here there's been a lot of people who have given talks today, and they're not all up here. Feel free to ask a question that would involve some of the other people who have contributed here today. These panelists are here partly because they've come from so far, and this is an opportunity that you'll have to ask them questions that you won't have later. There are also people who are living and working here in Singapore doing outstanding work, and so we hope that you'll also have an opportunity to contact them as well with your questions even after this conference ends. So I think one of the most remarkable things about cognitive science, which is such a young field, when I talk to people, is to hear all the different paths that led people to this field. I'm not sure anybody starts off thinking cognitive science is the area that I want to explore and be a scientist in. I think that it starts off with a much more personal passion or interest that somehow other people label cognitive science. That's how it's felt to me. So I would like to ask each of our panelists here to give just a brief sentence or two about the path, the intellectual path that led you to this strange and hybrid field. Yeah, can we start with you, Charles?
I think it was, for me, a very personal decision that I never wanted to be bored in my life, and I never wanted to do something that I disliked. And I think in school, oftentimes, you get into this habit of just always trying to get an A, no matter what the task is. And I was tired of trying to get A's. I wanted to actually stop getting A's and just do what I liked because I felt like time was short. And that took me away from a lot of traditional research areas and just, I said, well, what do I really care about? And all I care about is music. And that's why I study music.
I was never so great on A's. I was your good, solid B-plus student. But when I was an undergraduate, I became very involved in computer programming. And I actually worked for the first .com back in the 60s. And somewhere during that experience, I became disillusioned with computer science because I decided it was a technical pursuit. And I decided to study the brain because I thought there were frontiers there, and I thought it was exciting once I learned that it was possible. And so at the time that Bill Gates turned to computer science and made computers what they are today, I turned to neuroscience and became part of a community that has been very successful at really understanding how we work.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, extrapolating from Charles's A's and Stephen's B+, I'm a professor of psychology at Yale. I earned a D in Introduction to Psychology in college, which I took my senior year. having been forced to do so. I'm fairly sure I earned even worse than a D, but I would not have graduated had I not. So thank you to the college professor who did that. Extrapolating, I don't know what this means for you, Liz, but I guess we'll hear in a second. My route also was via computer science. I was a computer scientist at first, and I guess my route came from learning a distinction which I think is very difficult to learn, which is the distinction between being good at something and liking it. So I was very good at computer science, and so that just led me to do computer science. And it took me years to realize that despite being good at it, that wasn't the same thing as liking it, and that I liked the study of non-artificial intelligence much more than being good at the practice of artificial intelligence.
So here's where your extrapolation goes, Brian. I was a student in the 60s, and I thought grades were like a bad thing, and I actually never checked my transcripts. So to this day, I don't know what my grades were in college. I guess they must have not been too terrible because I did get a degree. So I guess I passed. All right, but that's about all I could tell you.
They didn't have college in the 60s.
Let me tell you what hadn't been invented yet and why I have a little trouble with this question. What hadn't been invented yet was cognitive science when I was in college. At least, and so depending on how you count, maybe it had been invented, but it hadn't been named. There were no departments of cognitive science. There were no programs. There were no courses in cognitive science. So I was an experimental psychologist, and I did experimental psychology all the way through and got actually to the point of getting tenure at my first job after like 5 years there, something like that, doing nothing but psychology. And I discovered at that point that as people were congratulating me and saying, oh, this is great, you get to do this for the rest of your life, that this kind of depressed me. I mean, I actually loved what I was doing, but I saw academic institutions and research and work as a process of change and learning new things and growing and exploring new fields. And so the idea of just doing the same thing again and again didn't seem so great. But I was really lucky because that very year, a new program was started at MIT called the Center for Cognitive Science, and they called me out of the blue and said, do you have a sabbatical coming up anytime soon, and would you like to come and spend a year here? And I became an undergraduate again. I still didn't look at, I guess I didn't get any grades there, so I didn't have to look at them. But I turned myself into an undergraduate again and took my first ever course in linguistics and first cognitive science-y related course in philosophy, and I even tried computer science, though I'm sure I was truly terrible at it. But that was actually my first encounter with the idea that you can pursue interdisciplinary paths that let you discover new things and move in new directions and shake up the way you're thinking about things. And that's been a great thing ever since.
Thank you all for that. Well, I think with that, I'll open the question to the floor. Good.
Good afternoon, Professors and Tara. Throughout the CogSci conference, the panel has shared various phases of cognitive science, and I'd like to firstly thank the professors for taking the time off to share with us. Seeing how cognitive science overlaps other fields, how important is it to be a generalist to succeed in cognitive science? That is to be a jack of all trades instead of master of one. Thank you.
Good question. Anybody want to pick that one up and run with it?
I actually think there's an interesting tension for a student. Over those school years where you develop these, you not only discover what you're interested in, which is, of course, a very important part of going to school, but you also develop basic skills. And the question is, what should those skills be? And the tension is that, on the one hand,